My sister begged me to help with her down payment, saying she'd be homeless. I sold my condo to help, then she laughed and said she was flipping it for profit. My parents took her side, but when the papers arrived, "I can't believe you're doing this to me." Madison sobbed into the phone, her voice cracking with desperation. "You're my sister, and you're just going to let me end up homeless?" I gripped my phone tighter, staring out the window of my downtown condo at the city lights below. Guilt twisted in my stomach like a knife, even though I knew I wasn't responsible for my sister's situation. "Madison, you knew your lease was ending 3 months ago," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What happened to all the places you were looking at?" "They're all too expensive," she wailed. "And Mom and Dad can't help because they're still paying off their cruise debt. Please, Sarah, I'm begging you. I just need help with the down payment. This house is perfect, and it's such a good investment. I'll pay you back. I promise." I closed my eyes, remembering all the other promises Madison had made over the years. The borrowed clothes that were never returned, the credit card she'd opened in my name during college, which I had agreed to pay off to keep her out of legal trouble, the countless small loans that somehow never got repaid. But this was different. This wasn't about clothes or cash. He was talking about being homeless, and despite everything, she was still my little sister. "How much do you need?" I asked, already knowing I'd regret this. "300,000, she said quickly, as if rushing to get the number out before I could change my mind. "I know it's a lot, but the house is in an up-and-coming neighborhood. The realtor says property values are guaranteed to rise. It's basically free money." My stomach dropped. 300,000 wasn't just a lot. It was almost everything I had. I'd spent the last 8 years saving every penny I could, working overtime at my accounting firm, skipping vacations, and living well below my means to build my nest egg. The condo I was living in was my only other major asset. "Madison, that's everything I have." "Not everything," she said, her voice taking on a wheedling tone I recognized from childhood. "You have your condo too, and you're always talking about wanting to move to a bigger place eventually. You could sell it. Property values are high right now. It's the perfect time." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want me to sell my home so you can buy one?" "Not just for me," Madison protested. "Think of it as an investment. You're good with numbers. You always talk about diversifying and stuff. This way, you'd have a stake in the property market in 2 different neighborhoods. And once the value goes up, we can both profit." I should have said no. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to end the call, to tell Madison to figure out her own housing situation like the adult she supposedly was. But then she started crying again, talking about having to live in her car, about how she'd never forgive me for abandoning her in her time of need. 2 weeks later, I was signing the papers to list my condo for sale. My parents were thrilled when I told them I was helping Madison buy a house. "That's what family does," Mom said, beaming me with pride. "We support each other. You're such a good sister, Sarah." Dad nodded in agreement. "Madison's been having such a hard time lately. This is exactly what she needs. A fresh start, a place of her own. And who knows, maybe it'll help her finally settle down, get serious about life." I bit back the urge to point out that Madison's hard time was entirely of her own making. At 32, my sister had never held a job for more than 6 months. She bounced from one get-rich-quick scheme to another, always convinced that this time would be different. This time she'd make it big. Meanwhile, I'd spent my 20s building a career, making responsible choices, and planning for the future. But none of that seemed to matter to my parents. In their eyes, Madison was the free spirit, the dreamer, the one who needed protection and support. I was the responsible one, the one who could handle things on her own. The condo sold quickly. The market really was hot. I moved into a small rental apartment, telling myself it was temporary, just until I could rebuild my savings, just until I could find another place of my own. Madison's house was, I had to admit, beautiful. A charming craftsman with original hardwood floors, an updated kitchen, and a wraparound porch. The kind of house that showed up on home renovation shows, full of character and potential. I helped her move in, carrying boxes and arranging furniture, trying to ignore the way she immediately started talking about what walls she wanted to knock down and which fixtures she planned to replace. "The bathroom tile is totally dated," she declared, wrinkling her nose. "And this kitchen island has to go. I'm thinking open concept, maybe some pendant lights. Maybe wait a while before making any major changes." I suggested thinking about the massive down payment I just handed over. "Live in the space first, see how you use it." She waved off my concern. "The realtor says improvements like that practically pay for themselves when you sell. And speaking of selling, she thinks with the right upgrades, we could flip this place for a serious profit within a year." I froze in the middle of unpacking a box of kitchen supplies. "Flip it, Madison. I thought this was going to be your home." "Well, yeah, for now," she said casually. "But you've got to think long term. Right? That's what you're always saying. And the market's only going up. It would be stupid not to take advantage of it. Before I could argue, she was off talking about paint colors and light fixtures again. I told myself she was just excited, caught up in the moment. She wouldn't really flip the house, not after I'd sold my condo to help her buy it, not after all her talk about needing a stable place to live. The housewarming party was Madison's idea, of course. We have to show it off, she insisted. Everyone needs to see what we've done with the place. What we've done was minimal. Some new curtains, a coat of paint in the living room, furniture arranged to maximize the space, but Madison had already hired a contractor to start work on her improvements the following week. I arrived early to help set up, carrying a bottle of wine and trying to maintain a positive attitude. The house did look good, I had to admit. Madison had an eye for design, even if her financial sense was questionable. Our parents arrived next, Mom clutching a casserole dish, Dad carrying a potted plant for the porch. They owed and awed over everything, praising Madison's vision and taste. And Sarah helped too, of course, Mom added, almost as an afterthought. With the what was it, honey? The down payment? I sold my condo, I reminded her quietly. Oh, yes, that's right, but you were planning to move anyway, weren't you? And look how beautifully everything worked out. More guests arrived. Madison's friends from her latest venture, something involving social media marketing, a few neighbors, some cousins who live nearby. Everyone was appropriately impressed with the house, complimenting the original features and nodding along as Madison detailed her renovation plans. I was in the kitchen refilling the cheese plate when I overheard her talking to our cousin, Emma, in the dining room. The bathroom remodel starts next week, Madison was saying. And once that's done, we'll do the kitchen. My contractor says we can have everything ready to list by spring. List? Emma asked. You're selling already. Of course, the market's insane right now. My realtor thinks we can get at least $100,000 over what we paid even before improvements. After the renovations, sky's the limit. My hands started shaking so badly. I had to set down the plate. Spring was barely 6 months away. She was really planning to sell the house. The house I'd given up my condo for. The house that was supposed to keep her from being homeless. I stepped into the dining room. Madison, can we talk for a minute? She turned, her face flushed with excitement and probably too much wine. Sarah, I was just telling Emma about our investment. Isn't it exciting? Our investment? I kept my voice low, conscious of the other guests milling around. You told me you needed a place to live. You said you were going to be homeless. Well, yeah, but this is so much better. She gestured expansively at the room. Think about it. We buy low, make some improvements, sell high. We could do this over and over. We could be house flippers. I sold my home for this, I said, my voice shaking. I gave you my savings because you said you needed a stable place to live. Madison's expression shifted. A flash of something, guilt, annoyance, crossing her face before she plastered on a bright smile. And I'm going to make us both so much money. Come on, Sarah. Don't be such a downer. This is a good thing. Everything okay in here? Our mother appeared in the doorway looking concerned. Sarah's upset because I'm being smart with our investment, Madison said quickly. She wants me to stay here forever instead of taking advantage of the market. Mom's face softened with sympathy for Madison, of course. Honey, your sister knows what she's doing, and it's her house after all. You helped with the down payment, which was very generous, but you can't control what she does with her property. Her property? I stared at my mother in disbelief. I sold my condo. I gave her my savings. I'm not just an investor. I'm the reason she has this house at all. Now, Sarah, Dad joined in frowning. There's no need to get emotional. Madison's thinking about the future, about building wealth. Isn't that what you're always talking about? I looked around at their faces. Madison's calculated innocence, Mom's disappointment, Dad's disapproval. They really didn't see it. They really thought this was okay. I need some air, I muttered, pushing past them toward the front door. Behind me, I heard Madison's voice, artificially bright. Who wants to see my plans for the kitchen remodel? I sat on the porch steps, gulping in the cool evening air, trying to make sense of what was happening. How had I let myself be manipulated like this? How had I not seen this coming? My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my friend, Lisa, who couldn't make it to the party. How's it going? House as cute as the pictures. I started typing then stopped. How could I explain this? How could I tell anyone that I'd let my sister call me out of my home in savings? I'll allow my parents cheered her on. But as I sat there, another thought started taking shape. Madison might think she had everything figured out, but she'd forgotten something important. Something about the way we'd structured the down payment, about the paperwork Mr. Harrison, my family's old lawyer, had insisted on. I pulled out my phone again, this time scrolling through my emails until I found what I was looking for. There it was, the documentation Mr. Harrison had drawn up. The agreement Madison had signed without reading carefully because she was too excited about getting the house. A smile spread across my face as I read through the terms. Madison thought she was being clever, but she'd never been good with details. She hadn't paid attention to the fine print, to the clauses Mr. Harrison had inserted just to be safe. I stood up, rushing off my pants and squaring my shoulders. Let 'em have their party. Let 'em plan their renovations and dream about their profits. I had some calls to make, starting with Mr. Harrison first thing in the morning. Madison had no idea what was coming. Mr. Harrison's office hadn't changed in the 20 years I'd known him. The same leather chairs, the same wall of law books, the same meticulous attention to detail that had made him my mother's most trusted advisor before she passed. I had a feeling we'd be having this conversation, he said, adjusting his reading glasses as he reviewed the documentation on his desk. Your sister never was one for reading the fine print. I leaned forward. So the clause is enforceable. He nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Completely. Your down payment wasn't just a gift or a loan. It was structured as a partial ownership stake in the property. Madison can't sell without your explicit written consent, and any improvements required joint approval. Relief flooded through me, and the renovation contract she's already signed. Void without your signature. I'd recommend sending cease and desist letters to the contractors immediately. We don't want any work to begin that could complicate matters. I sat back, processing the information. Madison's going to be furious. Madison, Mr. Harrison said dryly, should have read what she was signing. The agreement clearly states that major decisions about the property require both owners' approval. She can't sell. She can't renovate. She can't even rent it out without your consent. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. Madison's name flashing on the screen. I silenced it, watching as text messages began piling up instead. The contractors just canceled. What did you do? Mom and Dad are going to be so disappointed in you. You're ruining everything. Mr. Harrison raised an eyebrow at my phone's constant vibrating. Would you like me to handle communications going forward? Please, I said, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I think it's time this was handled professionally. By the time I left Mr. Harrison's office, he had already drafted letters to both the contractors and Madison, outlining the legal situation in clear, unambiguous terms. Madison would soon realize her plans for a quick flip were no longer possible, at least not without my cooperation. I was barely in my car when my father called. What do you think you're doing? He demanded, skipping any greeting. Your sister is in tears. The contractors refunded her deposits and canceled all the work. She says you're trying to sabotage her investment. Her investment? I kept my voice calm. Dad, I put out the money. I sold my condo for this, and now she wants to flip the house and leave us both without a place to live again. That's business, he protested. She sees an opportunity to make a profit. Isn't that what you're always talking about? Making smart financial decisions? Smart financial decisions don't include lying to get money or breaking legal agreements, I said firmly. Madison signed a contract making me part owner of that house. She doesn't get to make unilateral decisions about selling or renovating. There was a pause on the other end. Part owner? What are you talking about? Check with Mr. Harrison, I suggested. He drew up the paperwork. I'm sure he'd be happy to explain it to you. After I hung up, I drove to my small rental apartment, thinking about how different it was from my condo. The space was cramped, the appliances outdated, the neighborhood far less convenient. I'd given up so much to help Madison, but I wasn't going to let her take advantage of me again. My phone kept buzzing with messages from family members, cousin telling me I was being selfish, aunt suggesting I be the bigger person, mom sending guilt-tripped texts about family harmony. I muted them all. Around dinner time, there was a knock at my door. Madison stood there, eyes red from crying, clutching a folder of renovation plans. Can we talk? She asked, her voice small. Please. I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. She perched on the edge of my sofa, looking around at my temporary living space. I don't understand why you're doing this, she said. We could make so much money if we sell now. The market's perfect, and I have buyers lined up who love the potential. The potential of the house I gave up my home for, I interrupted. The house you swore you needed because you were going to be homeless. She had the grace to look slightly ashamed, but pressed on. But this is better. We could both profit. We could use the money to buy something else, maybe even flip more houses. No, I cut her off firmly. This isn't about profit, Madison. This is about trust. You lied to me. You manipulated me into giving up my home by playing on my emotions. And now you want to flip the house and leave us both without a stable place to live. I'd split the profit with you, she protested. We could both get apartments, or I had an apartment. I reminded her. I had a condo I loved. I gave it up because you convinced me you needed help. She slumped back against the sofa. So what do you want? You want me to just live there forever? Never make any changes or improvements? I want you to honor our agreement, I said. The one you signed. Any major changes need both our approval. And right now, I don't approve of anything that puts either of us at risk of being without a home again. Madison's face darkened. You're just jealous because I saw an opportunity and you didn't. You're so stuck in your careful, boring ways that you can't recognize a good deal when you see it. I laughed without humor. A good deal? Like the crypto investment that ate up your savings last year, or the juice cleans business that left you in debt, or maybe the life coaching certification you never finished. She stood up abruptly, gathering her renovation plans. You know what? Keep your precious control, but don't expect me to thank you for ruining my chances at success. And don't expect Mom and Dad to understand either. As she stormed out, slamming the door behind her, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in our adult lives, I wasn't backing down. I wasn't smoothing things over. I wasn't putting Madison's needs ahead of my own. Mr. Harrison called the next morning with an update. Your sister's realtor reached out, he said. Apparently, there were already some informal agreements in place about selling the house. I've clarified the legal situation, and the realtor has withdrawn from any involvement. I closed my eyes, imagining Madison's reaction to that news. Thank you. What's our next step? That depends on what you want, he said. We're in a strong legal position. You could force a sale and split the proceeds, buy out your sister's share, or maintain the current arrangement with the understanding that all decisions must be mutual. I thought about my cramped rental apartment, the home I'd given up, and Madison's pattern of impulsive decisions. Let's start by making sure everyone understands exactly where things stand legally, I said. After that, we'll see what Madison decides to do when she realizes she can't just flip the house and walk away. As I hung up, another text from my mother arrived. Family meeting tonight. Your attendance is mandatory. I smiled, piping back. Sorry. Can't make it. My lawyer can be available tomorrow morning if you'd like to discuss things formally. It was time for my family to learn that their usual tactics wouldn't work anymore. I have the law on my side, and I wasn't backing down. The family meeting happened without me, but I heard all about it from my cousin, Emma, who called me the next morning. You should have seen it, she said. Madison had a complete meltdown when she realized she couldn't bully you into selling. She actually threw her phone across the room when the realtor's email came through, canceling their listing agreement. I stirred my morning coffee, trying to picture the scene. How did Mom and Dad react? Oh, they're still taking her side, of course. But Emma hesitated. I think your dad's starting to get worried. He was asking a lot of questions about the legal agreement you had drawn up. I don't think you realize how serious this was until now. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. Need to talk, coming by your office at lunch. I worked through the morning focusing on spreadsheets and client meetings instead of family drama. But at precisely noon, my father appeared in my office doorway looking uncomfortable in the corporate setting. Nice place, he said, glancing around at my awards and certifications. They really value you here, don't they? They do. I agreed. Because I'm reliable, trustworthy, and good at my job. What can I help you with, Dad? He sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk. This has to stop, Sarah, your sister. She's not handling this well. She's talking about having to file for bankruptcy if she can't sell the house. She says her credit will be ruined. Her credit? I raised an eyebrow. The mortgage is in my name, Dad. I'm the one who qualified for it. I'm the one who put up the money. Madison's name is only on the deed because I agreed to it. His face fell. I didn't know that. There's a lot you don't know, I said quietly. Like how Madison had already lined up buyers before the housewarming party, how she signed contracts for renovations without having the money to pay for them, how she was planning to flip the house and leave us both without a place to live again. She was just trying to be entrepreneurial. He protested, but the argument sounded weak even to him. No, she was being manipulative and irresponsible. Like always, you and Mom are enabling her. He flushed. That's not fair, isn't it? When's the last time you held Madison accountable for anything? When's the last time you insisted she follow through on her commitments or face consequences? Before he could answer, my phone buzzed with an email notification from Mr. Harrison. I scanned it quickly, then looked back at my father. Well, speaking of consequences, it looks like Madison bounced checks to 3 different contractors. They're threatening legal action. Dad's face went pale. How much? $40,000 in deposits. I watched his expression shift from shock to resignation. Let me guess. She was counting on being able to sell the house to cover it. He nodded miserably. Your mother and I, we can't help this time. We're still paying off the cruise and with the new roof we needed. I know, I said, and I'm not helping either. Not this time. But she's your sister. Yes, she is. And it's time she learned that being family doesn't mean you get to take advantage of people without consequences. After my father left, I called Mr. Harrison to discuss the contractor situation. He confirmed what I'd suspected. Madison had written checks against accounts with insufficient funds, a serious offense. The contractors are willing to drop the matter if they're paid within 48 hours, he said. Otherwise, they'll be forced to pursue legal action. I thought about Madison's pattern of behavior about all the time she'd been rescued from her own poor decisions. Let them pursue it, I said firmly. It's time Madison faced some real consequences. That evening, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced, clutching her purse like a shield. Please, she said before I could even speak, please help your sister. Just this once. Just this once, I laughed. Mom, that's what you always say. Every time Madison gets herself into trouble, it's just this once. Every time she needs bailing out, it's just this once. Well, not anymore. The contractors are threatening to press charges. Her voice rose hysterically. Your sister could go to jail. Then maybe she'll finally learn that actions have consequences. Mom's face crumpled. How can you be so cruel? She's family. Yes, she is. I agreed, which makes her betrayal even worse. She lied to me, manipulated me, tried to steal my investment, and now she's facing the consequences of her own actions. And for once, I'm not going to stop that from happening. After she left, I sat in my quiet apartment thinking about family, responsibility, and consequences. My phone kept buzzing with messages. Madison's friends calling me heartless, relatives pleading for mercy, my parents switching between guilt trips and threats. I muted them all and opened my laptop, pulling up real estate listings. The market really was good right now, not for selling, but for buying. And thanks to Mr. Harrison's careful legal work, I had options. Options that Madison in her rush to make a quick profit had never even considered. Tomorrow, I would set those options in motion. But for tonight, I just sat back and enjoyed the quiet knowing that for once, I wasn't responsible for fixing my sister's mess. Let her face the consequences. Let her learn the hard way. Maybe, just maybe, it would finally make a difference. 3 months after the contractor debacle, I sat across from Madison in a small coffee shop downtown. She looked different. Tired. Maybe a little humbled. The criminal charges for the bounced checks had been reduced to a misdemeanor after she agreed to a payment plan, but the experience had clearly shaken her. I've been seeing a therapist, she said, stirring her coffee without meeting my eyes. She says I have issues with impulse control and magical thinking, that I expect things to just work out without considering the consequences. I nodded, but stayed quiet, waiting to see where this was going. I'm sorry, she continued. I know that probably doesn't mean much after everything, but I am. I shouldn't have lied to you about meeting the house. I shouldn't have tried to flip it without telling you, and I definitely shouldn't have written those checks without having the money. No. I agreed. You shouldn't have. She finally looked up at me. What are you going to do about the house? I pulled out a folder and placed it on the table between us. I've drawn up 2 options. The first is that you buy me out, pay back my down payment plus interest, take over the mortgage, and the house is yours. But that would require you to qualify for the loan on your own. She flinched, which I can't do right now. Not with everything that's happened. What's the second option? I buy you out a small amount given that you haven't actually contributed anything financially, but enough to help you get a fresh start. You move out, I move in, and we both go our separate ways. Madison stared at the papers for a long moment. You'd move back in even after everything. It's a good house, I said simply. And unlike you, I actually need a place to live. She signed the papers without arguing. 2 weeks later, I watched her pack the last of her things into a moving van. She was moving back in with our parents temporarily, something that would have been humiliating for her a few months ago, but now seemed to bring her a kind of relief. I really am sorry, she said as she handed over her keys, not just about the house, about everything. I've been a terrible sister. Yes, I agreed you have, but maybe now you can work on being a better one. The house felt different once it was mine, truly mine with no schemes or deceptions hanging over it. I repainted the walls not with Madison's flashy design plans, but with warm calming colors that made it feel like home. I arranged my furniture, hung my art, and slowly began to settle in. My parents struggled with a new family dynamic. They weren't used to Madison facing consequences or to me standing firm. But gradually, things began to shift. Your sister got a job, Mom told me during one of our now weekly phone calls, a real one with benefits and everything. She's working in the billing department at the hospital. That's good, I said. How's she doing with her payment plan? She hasn't missed a payment yet. And Mom hesitated. She's different, more responsible. Her therapist says it's because she finally had to face real consequences. Sometimes that's what it takes. A year after the failed housewarming party, I hosted a small dinner at my home. Not a party, just a quiet gathering. Emma and her husband, a few close friends, and yes, Madison. She arrived early carrying a small houseplant as a gift. The therapist says I need to practice being a good guest instead of always expecting to be the center of attention, she explained with a self-deprecating smile. We weren't best friends. We probably never would be, but as we sat around my dining room table that evening, sharing food and conversation, I saw glimpses of the sister I'd always hoped Madison could be. Later, after everyone had left, I stood on my front porch, my porch bought with my hard work and protected by my foresight. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. In the house next door, a for sale sign had just gone up. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. Thanks for having me tonight. I know it couldn't have been easy to trust me in your house again. I smiled, hyping back, baby steps. Another buzz. The neighbor's house is for sale. Please don't worry. I'm not even tempted to suggest we buy it together. Learning my lesson about real estate schemes. For the first time in a long time, I laughed at something my sister said. Maybe we were both learning our lessons. She about consequences, me about boundaries, and maybe just maybe that was exactly what our family needed. I walked back inside, closing the door on the quiet night. The house welcomed me, no longer a source of conflict, but a symbol of growth. Sometimes losing a home leads you exactly where you need to be.